Okay, it's going.
We still haven't gone.
Two impromptus in the first.
Are you gonna say your names?
Yep, say your names. Ashley Bartlett, Natalie McIntyre,
Zach Peterson.
Hannah Warner.
153,000 people die per day around the world. 6,390 per hour, 107 per minute, and 1.78 people die per second. This was said by the Center for Disease Control on March 4, 2013. I'm sure everyone in here might have a funeral in their future, or might be cremated or embalmed.
It is important to be informed about the many after-death rituals. First, we will look into other cultures' rituals. Second, we will explore embalming. Third, we will look into cremation. And fourth, we will explore funeral and burial rituals. There are many different death rituals from all around the world, from different cultures that we here may not be familiar with. And some of these rituals are quite gruesome, while others are actually quite simple. It was stated by George Dvorsky in the 10 Bizarre Death Rituals from Around the World article, published November 14th of 2012, endocannibalism is the process of eating flesh of the deceased as a way of mourning them. And this is quite staggering, but there was actually a Native American group known as the Maoris that practiced this. It was part of their religion and their belief. In this belief, only members of their own tribe could eat the flesh of the deceased. But the only difference is, in their culture, they actually ate the ground up bones of the deceased. And this wasn't a form of protein gain, and it wasn't for any sort of subsistence. It was simply because that was their way of mourning their deceased. According to Tabitha Stein in the news article, Funeral Rituals Around the World, published on November 9th, 2012, another after-death ritual is pit burial. Pit burial is pretty self-explanatory, as it is a massive pit that the deceased are put into. Also, the aforementioned went on to say that in 1941, a pit burial was found in pro-Nazi Germany. So pit burials are very common. In that pit burial, 380,000 women, children, and men of Jewish descent were found. So pro-Nazi Germany used pit burial as a technique to save money and to hide the deceased.
According to the article, 5 Intriguing Death Rites from Around the World, published by the Forensic Outreach Team on October 9, 2012, it's always Shark Week on the Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands are located east of Papua New Guinea and northeast of Australia. In these colonies and tribes on the islands, they lay the bodies of the deceased out on coral reefs for the sharks to come by and tear the body to shreds. Sharks are considered gods in these colonies and tribes, and they eat before many islanders do. Also found on the island are bone fragments and parts of the dead body in fish-shaped containers. That makes you think twice before purchasing that trinket from the aquarium store.
Also stated in the aforementioned article, 5 Intriguing Death Rites from Around the World, published on October 9, 2012. In the 13th century, there was a practice called mummification by the Egyptians. During this practice, the brain of the deceased would be removed through the nose. After about a week that the body would dry out, it would then be wrapped in cloth to help it from being decayed. If this person was very important to society, they would be placed in a coffin or a container. Also, when they were buried, they would have items that were of importance to them or valuable buried with them. This was the thought that after they died in the afterlife, they could take these items with them. These coffins and containers are very hard to get at, though, because many were covered with booby traps. The Egyptians did such a good job of preserving their decayed bodies with mummification that they can be seen today in museums and exhibits. There's an exhibit that came to the Minnesota Science Museum a few years back where mummies were on display. Now that we looked at mummification, we'll see how it is similar to another technique that we are more familiar with, embalming. Embalming is the process of preserving the bodies by chemicals or balsams for as many years as possible. It was stated by Pauline Dobbin in the Australian Institute of Embalming article, published September 19th of 2012. Embalming is a very old technique, but it has gradually been made more modern as the years has passed. It began in the Egyptian time period with mummification, as we already talked about. The Egyptians believed that this was empowering the soul to preserve those bodies. And as we already said, you can still see them today. That's how well the preservation worked. It moved on to the Han Dynasty in China. In China, they used salt to preserve the body, and that actually worked quite well. But then during the Crusades, it moved on to Europe. In Europe, during this Crusade War, they believed in the religion to preserve their bodies so as to return them back home to their loved ones. And so preservation was then necessary. And finally, in the Civil War time period,
embalming moved to America. Here in America, we have modernized it and made it more contemporary, so now we use chemicals instead of salts to preserve the body.
According to Elizabeth Sprouse, a previous mortician for How Stuff Works website, published on January 22nd, 2013, there are many specific steps on how to embalm a body. The first step is to clean and bathe the body. Then the body is placed on the embalming table. The second step is to make an incision in the carotid artery. And if we look here, the carotid artery is right along our neck and is in the blue area. It is the main artery that leads to our brain. The next incision that is made is an incision in the jugular vein. The jugular vein runs right alongside our carotid artery. The third incision that is made is an incision in the femoral artery. And if we look here, the femoral artery is the main artery that runs right alongside our leg. The fourth incision that is made is an incision in the femoral vein. The next step in embalming a body is to drain the blood. The blood is drained through the jugular vein and through the femoral vein, through tubes, into a toilet-looking device. The amount of blood that is drained per body is about 1.5 gallons per body, which is about 6 quarts. The next step is to pump the embalming fluid into the body. The embalming fluid is pumped in through the femoral artery and through the carotid artery. The amount of embalming fluid that is used per body is about 50 pounds equals about 1 gallon of embalming fluid. So the average amount of embalming fluid used is from 3 to 5 gallons per person. So that is a considerably larger amount than the amount of blood that is in someone's body. The next step in embalming a body is to make an incision right above the navel or the belly button. A trocar needle is then placed into that incision site, and the blood and other bodily fluid in the stomach cavity is aspirated out. Aspirated is to remove by suction. The next step is to tie up the incisions and clean the wounds. The body is then bathed for a second time and dressed in the funeral apparel. The eighth step is to put makeup onto the face to make the body appear to be living. And also in this step, if the person was involved in a car accident and their face was deemed unrecognizable to the family, face reconstruction would also be done in this step. So according to the aforementioned Elizabeth Sprouse, those are the main steps that are used to embalm a body.
According to the Funeral Consumer Society Online, in an article published January 21st, 2013, and a personal interview with Emily Groh, a mortician for the William Dingman Family Funeral Home in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota, done on February 27th, 2013, there are 4 certain circumstances that embalming would be required. The first one is if there's going to be public visitation of the body, such as family, friends, relatives are coming to view the body after it's deceased. A second reason why it would have to be embalmed is if the body has died of a communicable disease. The third reason would be if the body is going to cross state lines via a common carrier like a plane. The fourth reason why embalming would be required is because the funeral is 32 hours after the deceased person's death. Now that we looked at embalming, let's look at cremation.
It was stated by cremation on the dictionary.com website published in 2013. Cremation, stemming from the Latin word crematu, is to bring the body to ashes, as by the use of fire as a funeral rite. It was stated by the Cremation Process article, published February 16, 2013. There are 6 steps to the cremation process. The first step is to transport the body from the place of death to a funeral home that has a cremation container. Not every funeral home has a cremation container, and the nearest one here in Sartell would be the aforementioned William Dingman's Family Funeral Home. The next step is to place the body into a cremation container. The body is then heated to 1400 to 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is heated for 2 to 3 hours. After this process is complete, the body is then removed, and it is the job of the mortician to ensure that all the ashes are consistent shape and size. Once this is done, the next step is to place the ashes into the urn. And the aforementioned cremation process goes on to say that the 6th and final step is to return the ashes to the family.